The posthumous opening voiceover sequence of Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard is one of the most famous monologues in movie history. I was living in an apartment house above Franklin and Ivar, the voiceover begins. William Holden's fateful journey along one of the most famous roads in the state of California turns out very badly indeed. As the film begins, his character is dead, face down in the swimming pool of Gloria Swanson's decrepit Hollywood mansion. In this Hollywood movie about Hollywood movies, the story of how he got there is a classic allegory of failed ambition along these figurative boulevards of broken dreams. Growing up in the Midwest as a gender dysphoric tomboy, watching movies was a cherished relief from the awkward realities of daily life. Emulating the actors in my favorite classic Hollywood films, I happily acquired a new borrowed masculine persona. Experiencing myself as a fictional character has been a mode of survival for me ever since. Picture two beautiful women, one in Los Angeles and one in San Francisco. You know, Casanova had a girl in every port across Europe. Of course, he actually had them. Juliet had everything I thought I wanted. She was smart, beautiful, funny, sexy. We flirted like crazy, but nothing more. That delimited intrigue was all she seemed to want. A protracted and in a certain way satisfying, unconsummated flirtation. Did I mention she was also in a relationship, lived 600 miles away, and had even more intimacy issues than I do? Truth be told, this all suited me fine. It was another classic odyssey of unrequited desire, a pursuit I know to be futile from the start, and a certain sad anxiety where I fear losing her, even though she has never been mine to lose. Am I too available? I'm always so eager to spend time with her. I'll drop everything for 10 minutes in your presence, I say, working the flirtatious melodrama for full effect when I call her. I drop everything. From my humble apartment in San Francisco's Mission District to her sunny bungalow in Los Angeles runs the oldest road in the state of California, El Camino Real. I will retrace the steps of the pioneering Spanish colonial missionary Father Junipero Serra in reverse. I will follow the royal road to her door. I decide to take the train. Father Junipero Serra, like his secular predecessor Christopher Columbus, has generally been glorified as a heroic figure who settled California by establishing the mission system and converting the territory's previously undisturbed inhabitants to Christianity. Father Serra might also be seen as a villain whose evangelical endeavor resulted in the subjugation of the Native Americans, the confiscation of their land, and the destruction of their way of life. This 1770s West Coast decimation of the native people parallels the genocide that the Pilgrims initiated at Plymouth Rock in the East 150 years earlier. It's Friday morning at the Oakland Amtrak station. The Coast Starlight train is several hours late coming down from Sacramento due to freight traffic. I wander the waterfront at Jack London Square. The Jack London part is as awful as Fisherman's Wharf, a poorly conceived tourist trap to accommodate the masses coming to see the little cabin they found in the Yukon that Jack London supposedly once lived in. By curious logic of tourism, the cabin is here as an attraction. He did live in Oakland for many years, but of course not in the log cabin. The port of Oakland itself is pure industrial beauty, a bustling expanse of ships and cranes, and thousands of big boxcar containers in varying colors, looking like so many enormous Legos from afar, all stacked up in the harbor. We pull out of the station 4 hours late, rolling past the freight yards of West Oakland. We pass alongside Monterey Road, where I spot one of the roadside marker bells of El Camino Real. The roadside bells dot the landscape from the mission at Sonoma up near Napa in wine country, all the way down to the border with Mexico. The story of how they got there can be traced back to 1892, when a Pasadena librarian named Anna Pitcher devised a plan to erect a lasting trail of roadside milestones to mark the original historic thoroughfare. The train proceeds south past California's ubiquitous faux Spanish colonial revival mini-malls, with their red clay tile roofs housing Taco Bells and 7-Elevens. Like the bells of El Camino Real, they appear every few miles or so along the highway. El Camino Real, the Royal Road or the King's Highway, evokes one very particular image, and it's striking to think that, of course, the King of Spain never set foot on it. The king referred to was Carlos III, who envisioned and directed Spain's colonization of California starting in 1769. El Camino Real is still the name of the historic route today, though centuries of progress have now shattered the 600-mile path into a fragmentary set of thoroughfares. The present-day route includes sections of Highways 101 and 280 and stretches of about a half dozen other state highways, as well as a wide variety of city streets. So picture this. It's June of 1770, just 6 years before the colonies of New England will declare independence from Great Britain. Meanwhile, over on the west coast, in New Spain, at the behest of King Carlos III, Father Junipero Serra and Gaspar de Portola have already journeyed north from Baja California and established the mission and presidio at San Diego. Now they take over Monterey and claim California as a possession of Spain. Over the next 50 years, the missionaries facilitate Spain's northward conquest of the territory by founding an ambitious sequence of 21 missions as far north as Sonoma. The route connecting them all is El Camino Real. LA is so completely different from San Francisco. The air at night is warm with a cool breeze. If you walk along Sunset Boulevard, you can hear the streetlights humming, and then there's the crickets. On the side streets, it's peaceful, and people have the windows open, so you can hear what's going on inside their houses. The dishes clatter after dinner, or somebody's watching Jeopardy on TV. I go straight to my hotel, flip on the TV. Turner Classic Movies is showing the Children's Hour. I remember seeing Shirley MacLaine's coming out speech when I was young. It perfectly expressed my own childhood experience of simultaneously knowing and not knowing that I was queer. She confesses to Audrey Hepburn, "There's something in you, and you don't know anything about it because you don't know it's there. I couldn't call it by name before, but I know now. It's there. It's been there ever since I first knew you." And then she hangs herself. Spending time in Los Angeles, I cross paths with so many women, mostly unavailable somehow. Straight, married, crazy, what have you. I'm invigorated by the sense of possibility here. People believe good things will happen at any moment. Their openness to new opportunities reflects an unrealistically optimistic worldview, which is either infectious or geographically instilled. She lives alone in one of those Spanish colonial revival, creamy romantic bungalows that were all the rage in Southern California in the 1920s, like Barbara Stanwyck's house in Double Indemnity, but smaller. Hugging her hello, I am struck by the sensuality, the sheer addictive quality of her being. She exudes this combined sexual promise and languorous attentiveness. Her warm, sun-browned skin, the smell of some tropical body lotion, the way she holds her entire body against me as we embrace. It's like heroin. I'm smitten and adoring. She's vaguely affectionate. She conveys this unmistakable vibe of being emotionally damaged in some way that attracts me with the idea that I could actually kiss her and make it all better. Here's one of my self-discoveries of the moment, that I have more in common with the crazy girls I've fallen for in the past than I ever before realized. A revelation brought on in relation to Juliet, as I realize her flirtatious, seductive, relentless efforts at hooking me in are a mirror image of my own behavior. I want people to like me, to fall in love with me, simply because it makes me feel better. I'm always searching for the thing that will make me feel better, and so often that thing is a girl. It's Monday morning. I'm leaving Los Angeles on board the Coast Starlight, and I feel like Katharine Hepburn in David Lean's Summertime, except my not quite Rosanna Brazzi isn't on the platform waving a gardenia, but sound asleep in Los Feliz, the happy place, while I melodramatically turn over the details of yesterday's encounter with Juliet in my mind. And this is my consolation, a story about how nothing happened. How quickly I move on. As usual, I barely know her. 10 minutes of small talk at a party, and as calculated as ever, I'm full steam ahead pursuing her. Amidst so many women, so much chaos and noise, I somehow end up right behind her in the line for the bar. She's so gorgeous I can hardly bear to look at her. It's a challenge for me to pay attention to what she's saying when she speaks. I'm so distracted by her beauty. I can't help but notice her relentlessly serious expression. Her face is classical, foreboding blue eyes under a strong brow with full square lips and a set jaw that conveys even more warning than her eyes. I'm utterly infatuated, and the ring on her finger marks her as clearly unavailable. We have a surreptitious Friday lunch and a walk through the streets of San Francisco together. She doesn't seem to care deeply about anything, not art or politics, material possessions, hobbies. There's her interest in nature that I don't really understand. I have an ostensible interest in this topic, but I'm really more interested in why it interests her. I theorize that people are overwhelming to her somehow. She prefers the company of plants and animals. There's something spiritual to it as well, maybe. Something that makes her deeper than she appears to be. Her charms are so much in her flaws, her apparent lack of interest in her appearance, wearing unflattering clothes, not wiping the crumbs off her face. Don't ask me why this is so endearing, but it is. In her presence, it's necessary to tone down my enthusiasm, lest I reveal the true extent of my interest in her. It's only on leaving her that I'm able to wallow in the details of our interactions. I cherish these aftermaths, the immediate reminiscing monologue where I tell myself everything that just happened. There's so much to say, so much not to say. If she's at home on this lazy Sunday, what is she doing? Cleaning the house, doing dishes, or something at her desk? She could be in bed naked, fresh out of the shower. She could be thinking of me, though it's impossible to tell whether she ever does. I speculate wildly. Would there ever be any legitimate circumstance to steal a kiss from her? Some extraordinary disaster or a temporary loss of sanity, a scenario involving apparent imminent death, maybe an earthquake or some other natural catastrophe. These inconceivable melodramas punctuate my waking life. After a long lunch of trying to seduce her over burritos, I lead her toward Mission Dolores, asking how she feels about Hitchcock's Vertigo. You have to go through the whole chapel and museum thing before you get to the cemetery. Along the way, I give her my charming, or else tedious, jam-packed geographical history lesson outlining the colonization of New Spain, the Mexican independence of 1821, and the Mexican-American War. We then move on for more leisurely flirting in the cemetery, so I can show her the low-angle shot setup of Jimmy Stewart stalking Kim Novak. We make a quick dash through the gift shop and emerge back to the harsh sunlight of the real world. It's like coming out of a movie. When you think about the colonial origins of the United States, the first geographical aspect that comes to mind is that New England began, of course, as a British colony, hence the name New England. The rest of the early colonial geographic history of our continent has held far less prominence in our patriotic mythology, with the westward expansion of the 1800s being attributed to simple manifest destiny. But ponder this. There were two other major European powers who had colonized large chunks of North America back in the day. New France was a huge territory which included land north and south of the current Canadian border. Parts of this would eventually become known as the Louisiana Purchase. A steal when the U.S. bought it from France in 1803 for only about $15 million. This enormous acreage was a massive diagonal swath spanning the middle of the continent, all the way from Louisiana up to Montana. On the west coast, Spain had established New Spain, which included everything south of Oregon, the entire American Southwest, all of Mexico, and points south. Not to mention Florida, which was eventually ceded by Spain to the U.S. in 1819. In 1821, the Spanish colony of Mexico finally rose up and achieved independence from Spain. The territories of New Spain that would now fall under Mexican purview encompassed all of present-day Mexico and the states we now know as Texas, California, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Wyoming, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. About 25 years later, in 1845, the year that Texas was annexed to the United States, President James K. Polk put forward a proposal to the Mexican government to purchase all this territory from them for approximately $30 million. Mexico declined the offer. Just a few months later, the U.S. Army of Occupation invaded the disputed territory along the Texas-Mexico border, provoking Mexican forces to attack them. President Polk now had the justification he needed to declare war on Mexico. The 2-year war ultimately resulted in 13,000 U.S. casualties and more than 16,000 Mexican deaths. Ohio Congressman Joshua Giddings summed up the sentiments of many anti-war voices of the time, proclaiming, "In the murder of Mexicans upon their own soil, or in robbing them of their country, I can take no part, either now or hereafter. The guilt of these crimes must rest on others. I will not participate in them." Ask any Californian about the gold rush of 1849, and they can probably tell you several relevant facts. That same person's historical knowledge is much less likely to extend 1 year back to the state's far more significant historical moment of 1848, the year that the Mexican-American War concluded. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, with the Republic of Mexico ceding to the United States more than 50% of its territory. U.S. historians of the war often emphasize the idea that Mexico had not been successfully governing this northern territory or its people, implying that the American takeover was not so much an act of outright aggression as an inevitable foregone conclusion. While President Polk's expansionist aggression had considerable popular support, there were also many contemporary detractors, including the young Illinois Congressman Abraham Lincoln and U.S. Army Second Lieutenant Ulysses S. Grant. It's not difficult to understand why the United States as a country would want to forget about the Mexican-American War. In the ongoing climate of anti-Mexican sentiment, it's easy to see the importance of remembering. The modern re-romanticizing of California's Spanish missionary era begins in the 1880s, when the state's burgeoning tourism industry reconstructs this heritage into a romanticized, nostalgic past. The painful truths of conquest are successfully buried under tales of heroic missionary priests and grandly picturesque Spanish California ranches. These disingenuous parables may have soothed the collective conscience of California's Anglo inhabitants. They also provided a convincing fairy tale backdrop for what remains a prominent ethos of the state's cultural fabric: the idea that it is a land of pioneers and visionaries, of angels and saints. The glorification of mission founder Junipero Serra across the state of California is another example of this prolific mythologizing. There are scads of schools, streets, businesses, and public buildings named after him, and dozens of statues dotting the landscape from Mexico to Oregon. Not to mention the Junipero Serra bronze that represents the state of California in the National Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C. Yes, this Spanish-speaking immigrant is one of our two statuary representatives there, standing alongside former California Governor and U.S. President Ronald Reagan. At this moment, we're standing upon the spot which was the northern terminus of El Camino Real as Junipero Serra knew it in his lifetime, or so the historic marker tells us. This landscape looks considerably different than when Mission Dolores was founded in 1776. Except for the height of the trees, it appears very similar to how it looked in 1957, when it was documented in Technicolor VistaVision for one of the greatest Hollywood movies ever made. I think of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo as a sort of cinematic ode to nostalgia. It's a cautionary tale, really, about the pull of the past and the futility of striving for things that are unreachable, precisely because they only exist in the long ago. Jimmy Stewart stars as Scotty, the retired police detective with a fear of heights. Kim Novak is the mysteriously obsessed Madeline, with whom he falls in love. Caught up in his own travelogue of desire, Scotty follows Madeline through the streets of San Francisco. Supposedly seeking a cure to Madeline's strange psychological malady, they drive 90 miles down El Camino Real to the film's tragic, pivotal location at Mission San Juan Bautista. Was Hitchcock's choice of the name Madeline for one of his most memory-obsessed characters an intentional allusion to Proust? Madeline's ostensible fugue state is induced by her obviously unhealthy, too vividly experienced attraction to some very particular San Francisco history. She supposedly believes she had a previous life as the fictional Mission-era mistress Carlotta Valdez. "Where do you go? What takes you away?" Scotty asks Madeline as he tries to uncover the mystery of her attraction to the past. A question we might also ask of Scotty as his obsession deepens in the latter half of the film, and ultimately of ourselves as well, as Vertigo succeeds in bewitching us under the same spell our protagonists endure. We too are entangled in the pull of the past, the desperate struggle against loss. Early in the film, Scotty goes to meet his old friend Gavin Elster at his shipyard office. Out the window of the studio set behind him, we see the rear projected image of the cranes at the San Francisco dry docks down at Pier 70. The things that spell San Francisco to me are disappearing fast, says Elster, voicing a perennial lament clearly as old as the city itself. In Vertigo's original screenplay, in a lengthy reflection removed from the final shooting script, Gavin Elster gives an impassioned description of the siren lure of San Francisco and its impact on his wife. You know what San Francisco does to people who have never seen it before, Elster begins. All of it happened to Madeline, but with such an intensity as to be almost frightening. She was like a child come home. Everything about the city excited her. She had to walk all the hills, explore the edge of the ocean, see all the old houses, and wander the old streets. And when she came upon something unchanged, something that was as it had been, her delight was so strong, so fiercely possessive. These things were hers. Elster's monologue goes on to make the claim that something in the city possessed her. Most people develop attachments to the cities in which they live. I came to San Francisco with no special affection for it, and then, of course, I fell in love. Like many people, I came here to reinvent myself and to find happiness. This city was built on people like me, pilgrims trying to find themselves in a place where crazy chosen paths are a virtue, and self-discovery is a civic value. I've been filming the landscapes of San Francisco since just a few years after I arrived here. In capturing these images on film, I'm engaged in a completely impossible and yet partially successful effort to stop time. I now own the landscapes that I love. I preserve them in the amber of celluloid so that I might re-experience these visions of dappled sunlight, the calm of a warm afternoon, and the framing of an alley as it recedes into the distance. These images serve as a reminder of what once was and as a prompt to appreciate what now is. In some kind of poetic, cinematic justice, as the city possessed Madeline, I possess it in return. One of the main reasons I'm so attracted to landscapes and buildings is the sense that, unlike people, they tend to endure for many generations. They possess an intimacy with the past that no person, however old, can approach. How to describe my deep spiritual belief about this, of how the things that remain unchanged and aging all around us in this ever-changing world actually anchor us to our current selves. And in the aching knowledge of the old, the lost, the forgotten, can be found the moment in which we come fully alive to this day. I once went to a Tony Kushner lecture where, in the midst of singing the praises of dialectics and socialism, he eloquently railed against the bourgeois decadence of nostalgia. Being a painfully nostalgic person, I've felt guilty ever since.
Everything new is better than everything old. The bad new things instead of the good old things, wrote that great dialectical playwright, poet, and theorist Bertolt Brecht. I love the rigor of that challenge, to be able to risk the satanic temptation and a retreat backwards towards what's easy, familiar, and safe, the remembered past, which is always misremembered, to always be on guard against nostalgia, to be able to see the future in the bad new things.
Aside from introducing the burden of Tony Kushner's disapproval into my life, this speech has prompted me to reflect at length and somewhat obsessively on my aversion to the bad new things and my affection for the old. To this day, I suffer from a compulsion to defend my overly intense attachment to the past. In the same way that outdoorsy people experience feelings of calm and wholeness from spending time in nature, there are also those of us who discover a profound serenity in the man-made environment of yesterday. All of this is not simple nostalgia, not Proust and the Madeline, and not an escapist Luddite rejection of forward movement into the future, but rather it is an attempt at mindfulness and a strategy in this exceptionally digital age for staying connected to the physical analog world in which we live. By reconnecting us to our humanity, I believe nostalgia could be the very thing that saves us. Amidst my own lifelong pursuits of various women, I ponder the question, who are my fictional brethren? Classic literature gives us four characters who have come to define the male figure in romantic love: Lothario, Don Juan, Romeo, and Casanova. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines Lothario as a man whose chief interest is seducing women, and cites the source of the name as a character in Nicholas Rowe's 1703 British play, The Fair Penitent. The Spaniard Don Juan dates back to the early 1600s. Again, the character's name would become synonymous with a womanizing rogue. Shakespeare's Italian paramour Romeo has the better reputation of these archetypal lovers, being the tragic figure with honorable romantic intentions, unlike the others who are all generally recognized as anti-heroes. Unlike these three fictional characters, Giacomo Casanova was a real-life 18th century Italian writer whose legendarily provocative memoir, The Story of My Life, enthusiastically recounts his seductions and sexual encounters with innumerable women. Entirely written in French in the last decade of his life, the controversial 3,700-page manuscript wasn't published until 1821, and then only in a considerably censored form. It wasn't until 1960 that the complete uncut French version was published, with the first complete uncensored English translation not arriving until 1966, more than 150 years after his death. When he was in his early 60s, his heyday having passed and reduced to serving as a librarian for a nobleman outside of Prague, Casanova became severely melancholic. Legend has it that on the advice of his doctor, he began to write his memoirs and was cured of his melancholy. He claimed that in the last years of his life, he spent 13 hours a day writing. Casanova has also been hailed for his philosophical reflections and aphorisms. Perhaps anticipating the doubts of future readers over the veracity of his exploits, he self-effacingly jokes, "I was foolish enough to write the truth. Never give way to this temptation if it assails you." What's up with my whole Casanova thing anyway? And it really is more Casanova by way of Walter Mitty, isn't it? In other words, nothing ever happens. I imagine California has this whole unique genus of greenery that thrives on, is actually nourished by, the exhaust of automobiles. The thick vines and dense ground cover attached to our overpasses and freeway cloverleafs are testament to this. Highway 280 South, also known as the Junipero-Serra Freeway, used to have a huge wooden sign just south of the San Francisco city limits that said, the world's most beautiful freeway. They took it down a few years ago. This ash-gray ribbon of road stretches north to south, conveying 100,000 little cars, like a giant slot car track set down upon this stunning natural landscape. And the more you think about it, the sadder it seems. Because, of course, it's not the freeway that's beautiful. Maybe someone realized this and decided to take the sign down. Why do I feel this desire to confess? Is it really such a bad thing that I drive 6 blocks out of my way anytime I'm in her neighborhood? Just for that rush of excitement I get from driving past her house, and for the thrilling, extremely unlikely possibility that I would run into her and be able to say that I just happened to be driving past on my way to where I really was going. Her presence in this city makes every walk to the corner store exciting. We start having regular get-togethers. We go to great lengths to avoid calling them dates. Coffee, a movie, a meal, a walk in the park. I'm meeting her at that quaint French cafe in the Lower Haight. I will get there early. I'll be at a little quiet table in the corner window, immersed in death in Venice when she arrives. This will give her the opportunity to observe me, seemingly unguarded and vulnerable, before I see her. I will appear deeply interested in something that is not her, giving the illusion that I actually care about anything else right now. As she interrupts me, lost in thought, I raise my eyes to hers with a look of surprised pleasure on my face. She feels she has gotten to know me more deeply in that moment. But that's not how it goes. She's on her cell phone when she arrives. She merely glances at me and taps the window to let me know she's there. I am waiting for you to love me, says Frank O'Hara in his poem The Light Comes On by Itself. Could there be any more precise characterization than this? The masochism of my longing is like an end in itself. William Wyler's Roman Holiday, starring Audrey Hepburn as the duty-bound princess prevented from pursuing her love for American journalist Gregory Peck, resembles such other classics of forbidden heterosexual love as Brief Encounter, Summertime, and even American Beauty. In these aching melodramas, we sense from the start that the longed-for romantic connection will not be consummated. The impossibility of them ever being together becomes the point of the story. So that is the trick: how to construct the tale in which our two protagonists seem destined for togetherness, and to get the viewer so invested in that outcome that they will be not just emotionally moved, but satisfied in a certain perfect way by the ultimate thwarting of that desire. The journalist and the princess, the doctor and the married woman, the spinster and the married man and the teenage girl. You and me. All I want to do is read novels and go to the movies. I crave the catharsis of narratives, those contained portrayals of life that give us the vicarious desolation and heartbreak, inspiration and triumph we don't even know that we need. It is in our own acts of storytelling that we must continue to try to evolve from false bravado into true courage. I continue to search for inspiration in the movies, just like I did when I was little. I'm inordinately obsessed with the stories of others, seeking within them the key to sharing my own. Like Madeline, I'm captivated by the past. Like Scotty, I have often pursued the affections of unavailable women. And like Alfred Hitchcock, I want to tell you a story about love and loss in San Francisco that reveals more about me than I ever expected to say.